everybody, I'm Bill Sanders, and this is Watch Art Sci, the art and science of watch collection. Today what I'm going to talk about is how a group of guys got together and created a $70,000 watch for $7,000. A bit of exaggeration, but you'll see what I mean. This is a watch we created. Lyrique is the name of the group. And Etude number 1 is the name of the watch. It's a time-only watch with great movement features and everything else. We really love it. But anyway, let me talk about more about how we ended up doing this. Now, one of the things is that the group and the watch collectors involved love watches. They're beyond just like buying a brand name and bragging about it. They're interested in the unique features of it and the whole essence of mechanical watchmaking. Now, one of the things that happened to me and a lot of other people, some of the watches we got, I got this FP Uran resonance about 5 or 6 years ago. And now I went and looked at the price. I couldn't afford a watch like this. And this happened with a lot of watches that I would save up for and get. And now it just went crazy. So one of the motivations behind myself and most of the other guys is that these really unique watches got shot to the moon, and especially with top watchmakers. So this is sort of the story behind it, and explained how we ended up with this, what we think is a wonderful watch. Now, first of all, one of the things I did, I went and I took a look at what are the top selling watches in terms of just numbers, and it turned out one of the top ones was Tissot. I think there were some other ones by Swatch that may have sold more, very cheap watches, but the Tissot sold about 2.5 million, and the average price was $415. Now, the second one was Longines, and they had $1.8 million, and their average price was around $1,313. Now, the third one, Rolex, they sold a little over $1 million. And their average price was $9,822. Now that price was, I think, sort of indicative of the kind of what we wanted to afford. Now, some of us could pay more than that, but that number sort of stuck with me because in looking at the popular watches. Now, somebody might say, well, why not just go out and buy a Rolex? It's a lot easier. Well, a lot of the guys had Rolexes, and they sort of got a little used to some of the more, I guess, independent brands by top watchmakers. And looking at this chart, the red line and then the other red line, if you go around clockwise around it, the top 10 watches account for 2/3 of the Swiss watch sales. All right, that's just 10 brands, and then you have some other ones. But there's the only other thing that's bigger than the number Rolex is this group called Others, and a lot of different things are in Others. Mostly watches I can't afford. Some of the companies that all of us like to some extent were FP Uran, Gronfell, Laurent Ferrier, Wittenlanen, Urban Jurgensen, MB&F, De Bethune, Garibald Force, Ferdinand Berthold, Aki Riva, Bernhard Leder. These are all top watchmakers. Some of the brands that are sort of an interesting mix we also have a lot of respect for H. Moser, Beauvais, Parmigiani, and Hermes. Hermes is one that surprisingly is starting to come up, but they have a real span. Some of them are really top watchmakers involved. Other ones are for a little more frivolous, for quartz watches and so forth. But still, they've got some high-end watches that are just really amazing. So these are some of the other ones. Now, in terms of watchmakers, Jean-Francois Mojon, Jean-Marc Viderec, both of those watchmakers won the Watchmaker of the Year at the Grand Prix d'Or of DJ Genève. And of course, Philippe Dufour. Philippe Dufour won some kind of big, huge award. There's another whole group of watchmakers, AHCI watchmakers. This is an organization of some of the best, really excellent watchmakers, not only in Switzerland, in the world. Here again, though, there was this one guy, this young French guy, and he made some watches. I thought, wow, I'm going to go. Maybe the guy didn't know enough to... His watches, I think, were $30,000-$60,000. I couldn't afford those either. And that was true with a lot of them. And so one of the situations we were in, we thought, well, maybe what we could do is get a movement from one of these top watchmakers and then contract with one of the top case makers and sort of go through the whole process. And that's what we did. And let me sort of show you this is sort of how we identified the market. It's a small market, but it's unserved. It's a watch buyer's market that nobody pays too much attention to. First of all, it's not huge, but these are collectors who come to appreciate really finer horology. But even on the pre-owned market, or almost especially on the pre-owned market, everything is got to the point with these top watchmakers, you just can't afford them anymore. This, my Chrononet Resonance by F.P. Journe is an example. That thing went up 10 times, at least 10 times what I paid for it, almost 20 times. Just crazy. So what I thought, well, this rather than looking at this, well, poor guys, it's an opportunity for the watchmakers. Now, there are a lot of really top watchmakers like Agenor, which was founded by Jean-Marc Viderec, Trinode, which is founded by Jean-Francois Mojon, and some other ones like that. There's a German one with a wonderful movement by Marco Lang that's, Uran, Dresden. And so you have these that they're out there, and they're the major and most important part of a watch was the movement. So this is sort of going through the process. Now, what we looked at was there is sort of a rule of thumb. It was in publishing. I was in publishing, and other people in other types of businesses said, yeah, it sort of sounds right. And that is that the retail price is estimated around 10 times the manufacturing cost. And so the idea, of course, would be, well, let's see if we can put together a watch using all of these top watchmakers, the case makers, and so forth. And then what we're not going to have to pay is the marketing, the advertising, the promotion, the retail outlets, the AD discounts, and online sales. What we thought, well, we'll follow Abraham Louis Breguet. We'll have a subscription watch. And the subscription part was that we'll see if we could get enough people together, and everybody would then subscribe to the watch, and then we'd create it. And that's what we did. So let me go through that process. Now, I've talked about this to some extent in other videos, but I wanted to sort of go into a little more detail. Here, we set up a page, a Facebook page called Pure Horology. Now, there's the High Horology Lounge, which is another Facebook group page where people go and talk about really excellent watches. And pure horology was one. I thought, well, for people who are interested in getting together and creating their own watch. So that's what we did with pure horology. And at the time, this is only a little over a year ago, there were maybe 40, 50 people who were part of that. And as we started making our watch and people saw what we were doing and we could do it, it jumped to 700 very quickly. And so it was, it's a lot of a lot of watch buyers, I should say, watch collectors are really interested in doing this because like me and a lot of other guys who had at one point been able to afford some of these top watchmakers, that may be gone for the time being at least. Okay, so what we did, we started off with pure horology as sort of an incubator, like something in Silicon Valley. They're working on, they have a bunch working on a program and they call it an incubator. And this is where you get interested collectors together, people saying, this sounds like something I'd be interested in. And then they can begin planning it, the type of watch they want, the price range, and then decide on a watchmaker, actually deciding on a movement maker. There's some groups who will approach directly a watchmaker and say, look, we like your watch, but could you do this for us and we'll buy X amount. And that's another thing that I've seen done very successfully, I might add too. But this is different. This is starting from the main parts and seeing if we could put it together in a way that would be unique and interesting. So once that bunch of guys got together, we formed what amounts to a task group. And a task group was a group that would contact the movement maker and get the prices, set up a payment plan, and then contact all the vendors involved. The watchmaker then establishes some offers. We'd go back and forth to some extent with the watchmaker. In this case, it was Agenor, one of the tops in the world. And then once we start going, they'd send an invoice, we'd pay the invoice, and then they would go through step by step. And there were clarifications and adjustment over time. I mean, we started the thing in the middle of a pandemic, so it wasn't probably the most ideal time for doing that, but we did it anyway. So the task group has a private Facebook page that we only let people who were in the group. And the people who were in the group, the ones who had started the subscription process, which was some kind of payment. And we didn't want to have people come in and, well, I want to do this, I want to do that, because we had to pay things. We had expenses that we had to get going right away for developing different parts of the watch. And we ended up with a bespoke movement. So we really had to start at the beginning. So we had the private Facebook page. We also use a program called WhatsApp a lot. The thing we liked about WhatsApp is that it has good security to it. A lot of this other stuff, I'm not too sure about the security. And so with the WhatsApp group, we were able to form a sort of a little window within that. And we all had all of the WhatsApp contact information if people had WhatsApp. There was some members who didn't for different kinds of reasons. And so the initial payment was a subscriber commitment. And right away we had expenses. So that would be the next step in the whole process. Now, this is a little more detailed about that. You have these different roles. Within the task group, you had members, you had a coordinator and a banker. In this case, a coordinator and a banker were the same person, namely me. I got stuck with both jobs, but I would recommend having somebody do the coordination, somebody do the banking. I think it's a good idea. I don't like I don't like the banking, to tell you the truth. I don't like handling a lot of other people's money, is why. And we went through about $500,000 before this was over. So this was something, you got to be careful about everything on that. And there are a lot of transfers. The main thing that the banker does is he receives transfers initially from the subscribers, and then he pays the bills. Basically, he gets invoices from the different vendors, and then sends each one an invoice. In this particular case, I think it's important, anybody who plans a banker, to let everybody know what they're paying for. One of the things we ran into, for example, was the transfer fees. We ended up with $1,600 in transfer fees early on, and then my bank decided, for whatever wonderful reason, that they were going to charge transfer fees on the receiving end. And so we saved a lot of money on that. But the people sending the transfers did have fees. They weren't terrible, but at least they weren't double, getting transfer fees on both ends. And then there are translation fees or conversion fees between different currencies. The way it was set up is that I was receiving everything in my bank account in US dollars, but then I was sending them to the vendors in Swiss francs. And I had to figure out how to get that done. And initially I went down to the bank and had them do it. By the way, too, the payments that were sent in were done by bank transfers. I would suggest that because really in the long run, it's probably, I think, the most sensible. Things like PayPal are fine, but the charges that they had were much higher than just kind of a straight transfer. Also, credit cards and things like that. I don't think, like buying a lotto ticket, you don't want to put everything on a credit card because there are other kinds of expenses. So we ended up doing everything with the bank transfers. A lot of guys had never done that before. I hadn't done it to the extent that we did. And so that was something that everybody they'd go down to their bank and the bank would show them how to do it. And I think, most of it later on, we're all able to do it just on our home computers. But it's something that can involve a lot of money, and you got to be very careful about that. And so you have all of these separate invoices to the designer, the case maker, the dial maker, the hand maker, the movement maker, the strap maker, the buckle maker, the assembler, all kinds of stuff. Now, in going through this on the rolls, the movement maker, that's where you want to start. I'll talk about that a little more in a second. Establishes the offers, sends the updates to the coordinator, creates the movement, coordinates with others who are creating the watch. This becomes very important. Now, one role that we didn't even think about, and we ended up, we had to get a designer. When I contacted the case maker. The case maker is a company called Uran and Caton. I was told, well, we're going to need some kind of technical drawing of the movement. And I didn't know how to do that. And some of the guys said, well, they played around with CAD. You don't want that. Hire a designer. They're worth their weight in gold, especially one we had. Now, when you say, well, how do you get to know these guys? What we did, and I think it was a good approach, the movement maker gave us suggestions, and we took them. We listened to them. It's really important to listen to all of the people. The designer had designed other watches. He was great. He went through a large process to make sure we got what we wanted. He also worked with all of the different people. He knew everybody, and that's another thing. Here we are. We had people from, I don't know, just about every continent except Antarctica, from all over the world. And there were 50 of us. And so this was the coordination. There's a lot of WhatsApp and everything to be sure to stay in contact with people. All right, so the designer sort of took care of all of that for us, and a lot of the meetings we had, and our meetings and the whole process was centered around the concept of consensus. Some people wanted a democracy, but the reason that a democracy can be problemsome if you have 49% of the people who hate something and 51 who do. It's not a good idea. I think working through a consensus works out better. It did with us. A lot of times the consensus would be to ask the designer or ask the movement maker or somebody, ask them what do they think, of a decision. That really helped. Now, before going on, I did want to have a caution about financial exchanges, and you need to use caution on all kinds of things. Some scammer could set this thing up and say, hey, let's build a watch together. You better know who you're dealing with, period. And so that I think is important to do that. How do you get to know someone? Well, if you know someone who knows someone and who knows the person you're dealing with, that's one way. But on the internet, there are all kinds of things going on. So buyer beware, or just beware of this. And once you get it going, though, and you have someone that it can be very good. But whoever volunteers to be the banker, there's a lot of responsibility, and you're worried that something will happen. So that's going to be an important role there. Now, in terms of the process, I think the most important thing is you got to start with the movement, because the movement is going to determine the case that you can use. We had decided we wanted a 39 millimeter case because it was big enough and small enough for what we thought was a good for everybody. And like I said, we had people from all over the world. I forgot how many countries, 16, 17 countries, and we had a lot. So that's a very important starting point. The hand type number and size are determined by the movement as well. So there's some hands down there in the lower right. Now you might not think hands are important, and why would well, they are, because sometimes the positioning of like where the second hand is, I thought was relatively tight. And but they were able to, our designer helped us design something and gave it to the hand maker, and the hand maker, who does fabulous work, did it for us. The dial was something. What we did was that we were looking at Philippe Dufour's Simplicity 37, and we noticed that on it had metal limb. And I read a little article, or part of an article, and Dufour was talking about, well, how come you let them advertise the name of their, and he said, because they did it, and they did a nice job. So we thought, well, we'll talk to Metal Limb and see if they do the same thing for us, and they did, with a lacquer dial and so forth. And there was something, we learned so much. A lot of people said, well, why don't we do this, or why don't we do that? And we found out what probably wasn't a good idea, especially for our first watch going out. So you want to start with the movement. The case, that's another thing that you've got to know the movement to know the case you're going to want. Now, there is some simplifications that I want to add. There are some really good off-the-shelf movements. In other words, ones that have already been done. Crenode is a Swiss movement maker that's owned by Jean-Francois Mojon, one of the really tip-top watchmakers. There's Vaucheur Manufacture Fleurier. They're owned by the Sandoz Family Foundation, and there are a lot of watches that you may even be wearing. It has a Vaucheur manufactured movement. Really excellent movements. They make all of the movements for Parmigiani and some other companies as well. And finally, there's a company called Uran Work Dresden. Now this is sort of related. I'm not sure what the relationship is between what's called UWD and Langenheim, but you can contact them through Langenheim, and if you go to their website, you find out that they use a lot of the same buildings and facilities. but they also, this was a movement totally designed by Marco Lang, who's probably the top German watchmaker. He's also former president of the AHCI, really top-notch guy. So off the shelf, there's certain advantages to that, because a lot of times they'll make the case for you. For example, Washer, which requires 25 people, which isn't much, to get together to buy. Then you buy it as a group, and then you can also work with them for your case. I think possibly the dial and the hands as well. So that can really simplify things for you if you want a nice watch like that. A single payment watchmaking, man, I tell you, getting the payments is just no fun at all. Believe me. If you can, if the lower price watch, something under $5,000, just have a single payment. Somebody wants to go along with it, do it in one payment. It's for a lower price one. Some of the higher price, ours was well, we were sort of aiming for $7,500 for the target, and it was probably ended up a little more than that because we added some things we weren't expecting to. And also, we got hit by inflation like everybody else, so that can happen. What I would suggest, though, is that starting off with at least 50% of what you think the total is going to be. Now, these are all models based on subscription. And so, very much like Breguet, with his subscription watches, you start off with enough money to get started on the watch, or in the case of some of the lower priced ones, you can do it with the whole thing all at once. But you don't want to have a whole lot of payments. I made the mistake of having, every time I got an invoice, I'd tell everybody, okay, we got to pay this. Bad idea. And it was a lot of extra work and and we started ringing up all of these transfer fees. So take my advice, have as few transfers as possible. Another thing you can, this is simplification, you can have a Swiss coordinator. And by that I mean somebody in Switzerland who specializes in contacting the watchmaker or the movement maker or the case maker, puts all of this together, puts the whole watch together for you and ships it to you. There's a company that's by a guy named Miguel Bolea. It's called Develop Your Watch. The URL on that is developyourwatch.ch, all lowercase, all one word. So with somebody like that, what they can do, they can take care of all of the details that we had to do ourselves. And depending on how you look at it, it's good or bad thing. So this is what we ended up with. This is it was called the new caliber that Agenor made for us, AGH 6801. It had an Agenpit regulator. It's adjusted to 6 positions. These individually numbered. We had Agenese gearing for the second wheel. We just loved it. Now, subscribers, it was $7,500. The retail, including that, was $9,500. Actually, it was 9,500 Swiss francs. But mostly that we sold out to everybody. It was really interesting what happened on that, because initially we were hoping that we could get 20 guys together. We ended up with 50, but ended up selling 70 watches. Here's the dial on it. I mentioned the Medellin dial on the Simplicity, and then the hands. I was very much influenced by. There was a book that came out on Derek Pratt and all of the work he did, and I found one of the observatory hands that are very common in Urban Jurgensen watches, and I thought, well, that'd be a nice one to have. So that was how we made our $70,000 watch for $7,000. Let me know what you think. This is something that you might want to do. You can form your own group or do whatever you want on that. But it's something, if you really do appreciate and like these top-notch movement makers, This is one way you can do it more affordable. And when I win the lotto, I'll just go back to buying these right off the shelf. Let me know what you think. It's an opportunity to subscribe if you like. Until next time, this is Bill Sanders for Watch Art Sci, the art and science of watch collection.